Hello class, today we're going to look at part 1 of our curriculum review, which is about equations. So, first question I have for you today is, what are the steps we follow to solve multi-step equations? So if I were to give you this equation, what is it that we're going to do? Well, first thing is we need to get our letters on one side of the equal sign. Okay, and we do that by adding its opposite. The second thing we need to do is get the numbers on the other side, which we do the same thing. We add the opposite. And then last but not least, we solve. And by doing that, we're going to do the opposite. So at that point, you're either going to have a multiply or a divide. If you have a multiply, you're going to divide to get rid of it. If you have a divide, you're going to do a multiply. So let's go back and let's look at this equation. Let's see if we can actually solve it. Well, you know, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my subtraction sign to an addition sign. And then I'm going to change this 12 to a negative. And it looks like my pen is really big. See if I can shrink that down a little bit. Now it's too small. Let's try that one. So let's try this again. So I'm going to take this subtraction sign, I'm going to change it to an addition. I'm going to take this 12 and change it to a negative. And now, our first step was to what? Get our letters on one side. So we're going to do that. So I'm going to take this 7x and I'm going to move it over on this side to be with the 3x. Now we know there's two ways of doing that. The first way is we start with the 7x and we add a negative 7x to that. And then plus negative 12. Okay? And then if you add the negative 7x on one side, we've got to do the same thing on the other side. So I like writing the 3x plus my negative 7x plus the 4, and that is a negative 7x. Now I'm going to put these two together because they'll go together. So 3x and negative 7x are going to make negative 4x plus 4 is equal to, now on this side my 7's will go away. They will cancel out and I'm left with negative 12. Okay, so now I need to move this 4 over to be with the negative 12 because step number 1 is done. My letters are together on the left. So now I need to move my numbers together on the right. So this one I'm going to do it the second way of solving an equation. So one way is just adding the opposite within this one line. Now we have learned shortcuts now. And the shortcut is I can actually just subtract this 4 here and subtract the 4 there. And so these 4's now cancel out and we're left with negative 4x is equal to, and then negative 12 and negative 4 are going to make negative 16. And now we're to that last phase, which is the solve phase. And to do that, I've got to multiply by negative 4. To get rid of that, I do a divide by negative 4. So I divide both sides by negative 4, and I'm left with x is equal to, because negative 4 divided by negative 4 gives me a 1x is equal to, now negative 16 divided by negative 4 is going to give me a positive 4. Now you could take this 4 and plug it back into your equation, and if this side equals this side, when you plug the 4 in, then you know that's the correct answer. Okay, so that's how we solve a multi-step equation. In the 8th grade, that's the kind of equation that we have. Now we have one other kind of equation that we've got to look at. What if I have parentheses? Well, if we're going to use parentheses, then we know if we're going to solve equations that have parentheses, then we have to remember something about the distributive property. And the distributive property, I talked about it as being the pass-out property, because we basically take this number that's on the outside and we pass it out to every single thing that's on the inside of the parentheses. And you pass it out through multiplication. And you can remember that because A, right next to a parenthesis, means to multiply. So I'm going to multiply A times B to get AB plus A times C to get AC. Now, if these things, if they were alike, I could add them together. But in this particular case, they're not. So I have to leave them just as they are. Okay. Now, we could, if we had numbers, we could, add these numbers together first. Because this 3 and the 4, it's going to make a 7. And then if I multiply that 7 by 2, I'm going to get 14. Well, the other way of doing that is taking this 2 and passing it out to the 3, and taking the 2 and passing it out to the 4. So if I did that, I would end up with 2 times 3, which gives me 6, and 2 times 4, which gives me 8. And I then add the 6 and the 8 together, and I still get 14. So it works either way. So when we're dealing with equations with parentheses, we use the same process. We take this 2 and we pass it out to the 3x. So 2 times 3x actually gives me 6x plus. Now I need to pass this 2 out to the 4, which gives me the 8. Now the number one problem that people have when they do this is they pass the 2 out to the 3x, but they forget to pass the 2 out to the 4. We have to remember to distribute to every single item that is found within the parentheses. and then equals the 23. And now we solve the equation exactly the same way we did the one earlier. Okay, so we do our step number 1, get our letters together on one side. Well, they're already together on one side. So now I need to get my numbers together on the other side. So I end up going, I've got a plus 8 right here. So to get rid of that, I'm going to use the shortcut method. I'm going to subtract 8 from this side. And so I need to subtract 8 from this side. And I'm left with 6x is equal to, and now 23 take away 8 is going to give me 15. Okay, so now we divide by 6 because I have a multiply by 6. So to get rid of that, I do a divide by, and I end up with x is equal to, and now this is where we get kind of crazy here. We got 15 over 6. Now that could be an okay answer if that fraction is in the simplest form, but it is not, because the 15 and the 6, they both have a 3 in common. So if I divide this 15 by 3, I end up with 5, and if I divide this 6 by 3, I end up with 2. Now, we could have an answer of 5 over 2, or you could go ahead and simplify that down to 2.5 or 2 1/2. Okay, or 2 and 1/2, which is with the fraction there. Okay, so any of those answers would be correct. This 5 over 2 or this 2.5. Either one is fine. Okay, so let's see if you can try one. So here's the question that we have. What if we've got parentheses on both sets? What do we do then? Well, then you just continue to pass things out. That's all we do. Okay, so pause the video and you try this one on your own. Okay, so let's see how you did. So I'm going to pass this negative 4 out to the 2x, okay, which is going to give me a negative 8x plus, now I'm going to change this minus to a plus and the next number to its opposite to make things a little easier to deal with. Okay, and I'm going to take this negative 4 and pass it out to the negative 10, which is going to give me a 40. Equals. Now I do the same thing on the other side. 2 times x gives me 2x, plus 2 times 5 gives me 10. Now we go through our process again. Get our letters on one side, get our numbers on the other. So I'm going to move this 2x over to the other side by subtracting 2x from this side. So if I did that, I got to subtract 2x from this side. Now we need to remember this negative 8x and this subtract 2x, that's just two negative numbers. So when I add those together, I'm going to end up with negative 10x plus 40 equals, and then on this side, my 2x's go away, and I'm left with 10. So now I need to move this 40 over to be with the 10. So I'm going to subtract 40 on this side, subtract 40 here, and I'm left with negative 10x is equal to, and then 10 and negative 40 give me a negative 30. Okay, now I've got to multiply by negative 10 here. So to get rid of that, I do a divide by negative 10. We need to remember whatever I'm multiplying by, that's what I divide by. I do the same thing over here, and I end up with x is equal to positive 3. And again, I could plug in that 3 into each of these values, these x values on the top. And if the left side equals the right side, then I know that value would be true. Okay? Now, let's look at an application of this. Okay, so what if I were to give you a question like this? It says the perimeter of this rectangle is 240 meters. What's W and what's W plus 20? So we want to know what are the dimensions of this rectangle. Is basically what it amounts to. Well, I know for perimeter that I know this one's a W, and if this side is W, this side over here is W as well. And then if this is W plus 20, this one up here is W plus 20 also. So I could write the equation, because this is an equation, because this 240 is done by adding all four of those together. So I could do W plus W plus W plus 20 plus W plus 20, and all that's equal to 240. Now anything here we can add together that's alike, we can add them together. So I've got a W and a W and a W and a W, which actually gives me 4W plus, and then a 20 and a 20, which is going to give me 40. And all that's equal to 240. So now what we can do is we can actually solve this just like we've been doing the other ones. Okay, our letters are already together, even though it's kind of an ugly W there. Okay, our letters are together here on the left, so I just move my 40 over to be with the 240. Okay, so I do that by subtracting 40 from both sides. And I'm left with 4W is equal to, and then 240 minus 40 gives me 200. So now I divide both sides by 4. And W is equal to, well, 4 goes into 25 times, and then with nothing left over, so we end up with a 0 there. So So we get 50. So that means W is actually equal to 50. And in this case, since our perimeter was in meters, this is 50 meters. So that tells me then if my W is 50, my W plus 20, or my length, is actually going to be 70 meters. Okay, so that's what we're going to have you do on a problem here in just a second. Okay, so basically what we got to remember that to solve equations, there's 3 basic steps. Step number 1, get your letters on one side of the equal sign. And we do that by adding the opposite. Then we get the numbers on the other side, and again, we add the opposite to do that. And then last but not least, we solve. So what I'd like for you to do for some bonus points is I'd like for you to solve this problem. Find the dimensions of the rectangle. The perimeter is given. We know that the perimeter is 220 feet. So your job is to find the length and the width. When you've solved this problem, when you've done it, what I'd like for you to do is go to the following link or go to Classroom and click in this link right here or follow this link, and a Google form will come up. And I'd like for you to answer this question. So you're going to answer what is the length and what is the width of this particular problem. So until next time, that's our review of equations.